Chapter 1. Escape. One day in November 1647, Jacob Armitage hurried through the New Forest to the house of Arnwood. "You must leave this house immediately," he said to Edward Beverley. "Come with me to pack your things. You must come to my home and stay there." "But why, Jacob?" Edward asked the old man. "Why?" "The king has escaped from his prison at Hampton Court," Jacob explained. "He's riding south through the forest, and Cromwell's soldiers are searching for him. And I've just heard a group of soldiers in the forest. They were talking about Arnwood. They know that your father was the king's friend, and they're planning to burn Arnwood tonight, because they think the king is hiding here." "Burn Arnwood? They can't do that. It's my house, and I'm staying here," Edward said angrily. He was 14 years old, the oldest of the 4 Beverley children. The Beverley children lived alone at Arnwood, with an old woman who did the cooking and all the work of the house. Their father, Colonel Beverley, was killed while fighting for King Charles I at Naseby in 1645. Before he left home, he asked Jacob, a poor forester who lived near Arnwood, to look after his family. Jacob knew the family well and was happy to do this. And when the children's mother died a few months later, Jacob came every day to visit the children and to help them. "My dear boy," Jacob said, "remember your sisters and brother. The soldiers will shoot them, or burn them in the house. No, no, you must all come with me." In the end, Edward agreed. He and his brother, Humphrey, who was 12, packed their things. Then they put them on Jacob's horse, White Billy, who was waiting outside. Jacob told Alice, who was 11, and Edith, who was 8, that they were going to visit his home in the forest. He did not tell them about the soldiers. "Edward, here is my key," said Jacob quietly. "Lock the door of the house and take my gun from the wall. Don't leave your brother and sisters. I'll help the cook to pack her things, and then I'll follow you." The 4 children left the big house and went into the forest with White Billy. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon and already dark. Jacob helped the cook, who hurried away to her family in Lymington, and then he hid in the trees near the house and waited. After a while, he heard horses, and the parliamentary soldiers arrived. Soon they were in the gardens and all round the house. A few minutes later, Jacob saw black smoke going up into the sky. Then he saw flames at the windows. Arnwood was burning. "It is done," thought Jacob, and he hurried away into the forest. In half an hour, he arrived at his cottage. He looked back and saw the flames of Arnwood shooting higher and higher above the trees. When he knocked on his door, Edward opened it and came out with Smoker, Jacob's big dog. "My sisters are asleep in bed," Edward told Jacob. Then Edward saw the flames of Arnwood and the angry red light between the trees, and he was silent. "I told you," Jacob said. "The soldiers didn't look for you in the house before they burnt it." "Arnwood is my house," said Edward angrily. "And when I'm a man, I'll fight Cromwell's soldiers for this." "Perhaps you will," Jacob said quietly. "But let's go inside now. It's a cold night." Edward slowly followed Jacob into the cottage. He hated Cromwell and the parliamentary soldiers. First they killed his father, and now they burnt his house. He lay down on the bed, but he did not sleep. Jacob lived alone because his wife was dead, and he had no children. His cottage had one large room for living and cooking, and 3 small bedrooms behind. Outside, there were a few chickens and pigs in one field, and some old fruit trees in another field. The next morning, Jacob began to teach the children how to cook and to clean the cottage. It was all new work to them, because rich children, like the Beverleys, never cooked or worked in the house. "You must stay inside today," Jacob told them, "because the soldiers are still searching the forest. Let's get some dinner ready. We can all help. Edward, will you go and get some water from the river?" The children enjoyed cooking their first meal. They washed some potatoes and cut some meat and vegetables into pieces. Then they put them with some water in a pot on the fire. Little Edith put plates and knives on the table. While the dinner was cooking, Edward stood outside the cottage, watching out for soldiers, and the other 3 made the cottage tidy. But just before dinner was ready, Edward ran back inside. "I can see soldiers, and they're riding this way." Jacob was silent for a minute. "My dear children, those soldiers will search the cottage, and I don't want them to see your rich clothes. You must go to bed and pretend to be ill. Edward, you can put on one of my old shirts." The younger children got into bed and hid their rich clothes. Edward put on Jacob's old shirt and sat next to the bed with a cup of water for his sisters. Quickly, Jacob put away the plates and knives. Soon there was a knock on the door. "Come in," said Jacob. "Who are you, my friend?" asked one of the soldiers. "A poor forester, sir," replied Jacob. "In great trouble. My grandchildren are all in bed, very ill." "We must search your cottage for the king." "Very well, but please don't frighten the children." The men began to search the cottage. Edith screamed when she saw them, but Edward told her not to be afraid. "There's nothing here," one of the soldiers said. "Let's go. I'm tired and hungry." "There's something here that smells good," said another soldier. "What is it?" he asked, looking into the pot. "My dinner for a week," explained Jacob. "I can't light a fire every day, so I cook once a week." "Well, it looks good, so we'll try some," the soldiers said, and they put the pot on the table, sat down, and ate everything. Then they thanked Jacob and rode away. Jacob called the children and told them to get up. "The soldiers have gone," he said. "And our dinners have gone too," said Humphrey, looking at the dirty plates and the empty pot. "Bad men ate our dinner," said Edith. "We can cook another," said Jacob. "We're all hungry, but if everyone helps, the dinner will soon be ready." After dinner, Jacob told the children that their lives must change. "The king's enemies think that you are dead, burned in ironwood, but you are still in danger, and so you must stay here with me and pretend to be my grandchildren. You are children of the new forest now." Chapter 2. Life in the Forest. The next morning, Jacob rode to the town of Lymington. There he heard that the king was in prison again, and that Cromwell's soldiers were going back to London. Jacob bought cottage clothes for the children and a few things for the house. Then he put everything on his horse and walked back home through the forest. While he walked, he thought about the children. They were so young and alone in a dangerous world. He was their only friend. But he was an old man, and perhaps would not live long. He knew he must teach them how to find food and do everything for themselves. After dinner, he called the children round him. "Now, remember, you are my grandchildren, and your name is Armitage, not Beverly. I've bought you some cottage clothes to wear, and you must all learn to work and live like a forester's children. Edward is the oldest, and he must come out with me into the forest and learn how to hunt. Then we'll have meat to eat every day. Humphrey, you must look after the horse and the pigs and bring water from the river every day. Alice, dear, you must light the fire, clean the house, and wash the clothes. And you and Humphrey will both learn how to cook. And little Edith will look after the chickens and look for the eggs every morning. Will you, Edith?" "Yes," said Edith. "I liked the chickens at Arnwood." There was no more meat in the cottage, and so the next morning Jacob and Edward, with the dog Smoker, went out into the forest. They walked quietly and did not speak. The red deer of the forest could see, hear, and smell very well, and it was hard to get near them. After more than a mile, Jacob dropped down to the ground, and through the trees, Edward saw 3 deer. Jacob moved silently forward on his hands and knees, and Edward and Smoker followed him. Slowly, they got nearer. But then, suddenly the deer, who were quietly eating grass, put up their heads and walked away. Jacob turned. "You see, Edward, hunting is slow work. Now we must go through the woods around the other side of the deer and try again." "What frightened them, do you think?" asked Edward. "When you were following me, I think you put your knee on a piece of stick and it broke." "Yes, but that made only a little noise." "Only a little noise will frighten a red deer," said Jacob kindly. "But these mistakes can happen to anyone, and you will learn. Now, not a word, and not a sound." In half an hour, they found the deer again. And again, Jacob dropped down to the ground and moved forward without a sound. At last, he lifted his gun and shot one of the deer behind the shoulder. The deer dropped to its knees and fell dead, and the other deer ran away. "This is a fine deer, and the meat will be good," said Jacob. "We're about 5 miles from the cottage, Edward, but Smoker will take you home, and you can come back with White Billy. He must carry the meat home for us." It was a good beginning to their new life, and the next day Jacob rode to Lymington to sell some of the meat. With the money, he bought things for the vegetable garden, a big bag of oatmeal for the winter, and a gun for Edward. That winter was long and cold, and they stayed in the cottage most of the time. Alice learned how to cook and to mend clothes. Edith learned to read and write, and to make oatmeal bread and cook it on the stones by the fire. Humphrey was clever with his hands and learned how to make things out of wood. Edward learned how to shoot and to look after his gun. They were all busy and happy, but Edward sometimes felt angry. He kept his father's sword by his bed and often cleaned it. He hated Cromwell and his soldiers, and he wanted to fight for the king. In the month of May, the leaves came out and the forest began to look green again. "And now, Edward," said Jacob one day, "we need more meat, both to eat and to sell. So let's get our guns and go out. You can shoot first." They walked 4 or 5 miles before they saw a deer. "Stay here while I go through the trees with Smoker," said Jacob quietly. "Then I'll stand up and the deer will run towards you. Remember, shoot it behind the shoulder." Edward waited quietly, and after a time the deer ran out of the trees in front of him. He lifted his gun, shot the deer behind the shoulder, and it fell to the ground. "Well done," said Jacob when he came back. "You killed your first deer, and it's a fine one too." Soon I shall leave the hunting to you and put my gun up on the wall." The spring was a busy time for everyone at the cottage. In the field, they planted potatoes and lots of different vegetables. Little Edith was busy with her chickens, and Humphrey built a chicken house and a house for the pigs. Jacob sold some of the deer meat and bought a little cart. White Billy was not very happy about this at first, but he soon learned to pull the cart behind him, and it was a great help with all the farm work. Humphrey loved the work on the farm. He was always making plans to do new things, and he was now very clever at building things out of wood. It was hard work. First, he had to cut down a tree and then cut the wood into pieces for building. One day, he began to build a cow house. "We need a cow to give us milk," he said to the others. "I'm going to catch one of the forest cows." Edward laughed, but Jacob said, "The forest cows are very wild and can be dangerous. You must be careful." June arrived, and they began to cut the long grass to keep for food for the animals in winter. The girls helped too, and White Billy was busy every day pulling home the new cart full of summer grass. Humphrey did not forget about his cow. He finished building the cowhouse and began to spend an hour or more every day out in the forest. He was watching the wild cows. Early one morning, he came running home. "Jacob! Edward! Come with me! Bring Smoker too!" "Why, what's the matter?" "I've found a cow. She's left the other cows because of her newborn calf. So she's alone, and we can catch her." "But how?" asked Edward. "I'll tell you later. I must get White Billy and the cart." Jacob and Edward followed him, and soon they were driving the cart through the forest. "Smoker will jump up at the cow," explained Humphrey, "and keep her away from us while we put the calf in the cart. When we drive away, the cow will follow her baby." The cow was lying near her calf, but when she saw them, she got up and shook her head angrily from side to side. "Go, Smoker, go!" Jacob called to his dog, and Smoker jumped at the cow, driving her back into the trees, away from her calf. Edward and Humphrey quickly lifted the calf into the cart and got in themselves. Then Jacob hurried back and got in too. "Drive off, Humphrey," he said. "I'll call Smoker now, and the cow will follow us. Here, Smoker! Here!" Smoker came running out of the trees at once. The cow followed and ran wildly after the cart, calling loudly to her calf. Before long, they were back at the cottage. "There's Alice and Edith running out," cried Jacob. "Go back inside, Alice. The cow is dangerous." Humphrey drove the cart into the field. Smoker kept the cow away, while they carried the calf into the cowhouse. Then they left and the cow followed its calf inside. "There," said Humphrey. "Let's leave her with the calf. Tomorrow I'll cut some grass for her." Every day for a fortnight, Humphrey brought grass to the cow, and every day she was a little quieter. After a month, Humphrey began to take milk from the cow. "I've learned how to shoot deer," said Edward, "but Humphrey has caught a cow and given us milk. You are cleverer than I am, brother.